All right, we should be live on Facebook, and we are working on getting this out to who needs to get it. So bear with us for just a minute, and we will get this out everywhere it's supposed to go.
Hello, Matthew. It's Johnny.
Hey, Johnny.
I was going to tell you the pyramid looked pretty impressive there behind you. I know you were in Egypt.
Yeah, I haven't spared no expense to get here. Yeah, I'm going to use a new backdrop. We use one for our kit class, so I had to adapt for all of them.
Yeah, pretty applicable for what you study.
Oh, yeah. That's why I try to find something that will fit good.
There you go.
All right. Let me check and make sure everything's going like it should, and we'll be getting started in just 1 minute. All right, we are here where we're supposed to be. Good. You think after 8 weeks we'd have this figured out and we'd have this lined up. So we're getting where we can get this thing going and moving as smoothly as possible. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started tonight. We are on my goal, my aim for tonight is to finish the book of Exodus. We are working on that for that class, and for this class, we've so far gotten through Genesis and Exodus. We are working toward finishing the book of Exodus tonight. That is, again, my goal. And then I promise you, you may be thinking, how are we going to finish all this? We've been 8 weeks and 2 books. How are we going to get all these books done in the Old Testament within the rest of this year and even into next year? We've only got 4 more classes left this semester. I promise you, we're going to go a lot faster once we get through Exodus, because Exodus and Genesis, I believe, are the two key books that we need to understand and need to have a firm grasp about what they are discussing and what they are talking about. And when we have that firm grasp on Exodus and Genesis, then it'll help us understand the rest of the Bible. And that's not to say these 2 books are you don't have to worry about any other books, but what I'm saying is that I'm saying these are 2 that lay the foundation. They lay the foundation of God and who God is. And Genesis lays the foundation of who Israel is and what God has done for Israel and what God will continue to do for them. So that's a little introduction out of the way. We're going to pick back up where we left off last week. We got to Exodus chapter 15. Remember, we talked about the Red Sea. The Israelites had marched through the Red Sea. They come out the other side. And after that, they began to, let me check something real quick. I got to stop this. I think I hit a slide that wasn't supposed to hide. We're going to show real quickly. We're going to show this trek they take it, and that's what I apologize for. I had a map here, and apparently I hid the map because I showed it last week, and I want to show it again this week. So I want to show you what we're looking at as we talk there about this idea. Oh, I didn't hit the right button yet. Here was all how good it was going. Here we go. All right. Remember I told you last week that this is what's interesting about this, is this is the map of where Israel was. This is the map of where they were going, the path they took, the trails. What you can see is you will see the red line in this red path. This is the idea of where Bible historians believe the path out of Egypt was, that we went somewhere down here, somewhere in here they crossed the Red Sea. There's discussion of where that exactly was. And then they travel down here. We're going to see, you'll notice in the notes in a minute, it's going to say they traveled to the wilderness of Sin. That Sin is another way of describing Sinai. It's just those first three letters. And so what we're going to see is we're going to see the land of Goshen is here, and they're going to come south before they go north. Now, this is very interesting because I told you last week, again, if you look at this dotted line here, these are two of the major paths that people have been traveling for years. You have here the way of the sea and the way of Shur. These were two that went right by Beersheba into Hebron, right into Jerusalem, into Canaan. These were the easy roads. These were God was trying just to get Israel as quick as he could from Goshen to Canaan. He would have taken these roads. However, he takes them into Sin. I think he does that. Takes them to Sinai to teach them and to show them a very important lesson. And that's what we're going to see tonight. Is they come south. And as they come south, they come back to Mount Sinai. That's where we're going to see a lot of the rest of Exodus is going to take place in Sinai. And again, remember, Sinai is not just Mount Sinai, but it's also Mount Horeb. In Exodus 3, we see the call of Moses. We see Moses is at Mount Horeb, and that's the same place as Sinai. So God tells him there, when he sent him out, I'm going to bring you back to this place, and that will be a sign that you are going, that I'm with you, and that I have been with you, and I've delivered you. So I want you to see that path real quick to get an idea of where we're at. We are down in this southern part. We're traveling here. And so we go back to our text. We're looking at Exodus 15, 22 through chapter 16, verse 1. They marched from the Red Sea to the desert of Sin. And in this marching, Israel begins to complain. Israel begins to complain about the travel, complain about the food, complain about not having this and not having that. And so God responds to their complaining. God gives them manna. Now, remember, the manna fell from heaven. We really don't know what manna is. It's a unique Hebrew word. It's some kind of, most people think some kind of like a flour or bread type thing that would appear with the dew. And the Israelites were supposed to pick enough that would last for that day. Any extra they picked, the next day would be full of maggots. And we even see some of the Israelites trying to hoard extra amounts of this to save it for the days ahead, because they don't, again, it's their lack of faith in God. And so it turns to maggots. And the only time they were allowed to get more than one day was on Friday, the day before the Sabbath, when they were commanded to keep the Sabbath holy and respect the Sabbath. They had to collect extra for the Sabbath so they wasn't working on the Sabbath. And so God responded with the manna. And then after the manna, a while, they complained about manna. And so God begins to send them quail. And he sent them so much quail, it talks about that they were covered with quail. Basically, the idea is that Israelites complained about God not giving them enough, and God gives them too much. God overwhelms them. I think God does this for a reason, to make a point that he is with them and that he will not forsake them. Therefore, they ought not to complain. Well, if you know the story of Israel, they begin to complain again. In Exodus 17, they haven't even made it to Sinai yet. In Exodus 17, they complain about no water, nothing to drink. And they go to Aaron and Moses to say, you brought us out here into the wilderness, and you've led us out here just to die. And then you remember the actual first time that we see Moses getting water from the rock. Now, there are different times that Moses will do this. And we know this is one of the major things that's going to cost Moses his entry into Canaan, is that sometimes God would say, part of the time, God would tell him to speak to the rock. There are times he told him to strike the rock, and Moses had to do it exactly. And when we see Moses fail is when God tells him to speak to the rock, but Moses strikes the rock. And again, that's that idea of his disobedience of God. And we'll talk about that hopefully next week. From there, we look at the second part of Exodus 17. This is the battle with the Amalekites. This is a battle that was swayed by Moses' arms being upraised. If you remember this story, that if Moses' arms fell to his side, the Israelites would lose the battle. And as the battle raged on, if his arms were lifted up, then Israel would win. And eventually Aaron and some other men have to hold Moses' arms up. They prop his arms so they stay up until the battle is over. And so Moses is doing this with Israel. Then in Exodus 18, we see Moses visited by Jethro, his father-in-law, who comes and sees what all God has done, and he praises God and thanks God for his deliverance of Israel. And as he comes here, he sees Moses with the people every day from morning to night. Now remember, there's 1.5 million to 2 million people here, and Moses is the only person who's deciding arguments, who's deciding disputes and major disputes and minor disputes. And Jethro sees Moses, and he sees Moses is wearing himself out. And here we have this wonderful sign of Moses, Jethro, giving this care for his son-in-law, but also giving care for those of us who are in the lead in ministry, to know that there's certain things we can designate, we can let someone else take part, we delegate, and this is what Jethro tells Moses. He said, assign judges over Israel. Let the judges assign the minor disputes, and if there's a major dispute that you have to take care of, then you can take care of the major things and not wear yourself out. And so Moses agrees, and again, God apparently agrees, and this is what Moses does. Exodus 19, we see Moses and Israel being led into Sinai. They're led to that mountain, and that's going to lead to this fateful transition for the rest of the chapter, from chapter 20 to chapter 35 is all going to take place at this mountain. When I get to the mountain, God warns them in chapter 19 that when you get to Mount Sinai, you're not to step foot on the mountain. Don't come close to the mountain. The mountain is holy. And if an animal gets on the mountain, it's supposed to be struck down. And God comes, and what's interesting about this, the 10 Commandments, is sometimes we think about those commandments are written on that tablet of stone by the hand of God. And we think Moses got that here. Moses didn't get that till later. Here, God is speaking from the mountain to all of Israel. All of Israel is surrounded at the bottom, and God speaks. A fire descends upon this mountain. He gives them the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, basically summed up, are these. Number 1, you shall have no other gods before me. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, that is in the earth beneath, that is in the water, or what is in the water under the earth. Then number 3, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Number 5, honor your father and your mother. Number 6, you shall not murder. Number 7, you shall not commit adultery. Number 8, you shall not steal. Number 9, you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Number 10, you shall not covet. Now, looking at these 10 Commandments real quick, I want to reference a New Testament thing here. When Jesus is asked about the greatest commandment, and he gives 2, a lot of people look at those 2 commandments, and even the Israelites, the rabbis of their time, the time of Jesus, taught this. We see the lawyer, when he questions Jesus, when Jesus gives the parable of the Good Samaritan, says the same thing. And that is that the law, or at least the 10 Commandments, can be summed up in 2 commandments. The first is love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. You remember that commandment? Well, if you look at the first 4 commandments, the first 4 commandments of the 10 Commandments deal with God. Deal with their relationship with God. No other gods, no carved image, not take the Lord's name in vain, and remember his day. Number 5 through number 10 is the second part where Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself. And if you love your neighbor as yourself, then you're going to do these next 6. You're going to honor your father and mother. You're not going to commit murder. You're not going to commit adultery. You're not going to steal. You're not going to bear false witness. You're not going to covet. And so these 10 commandments can be summed up in those 2 commandments. And so I just wanted you to see that these commandments were divided about half. The first 4 deal with God. The last 6 deal with our dealings with mankind. And so he speaks from the mountain, and he speaks to all these people. And again, you can imagine what kind of a presence. I've often wondered what it would have been like to be at that mountain, to hear God speak and to hear God give his law to those 1.5 million, 2 million people. And a matter of fact, it's so interesting is you look at chapter 20, verse 18, that's where the Ten Commandments are in verse 17. Verse 18, the people come to Moses. It's very interesting to me because people come to Moses and say, we've heard God. We heard God speak from the mountain and God scares us. So here's what we want you to do, Moses. You go up on the mountain and you talk to God. And then when God tells you to do something, you come back and you tell us and we'll do it. They basically say, we're scared to hear from God. We want to hear from you. And so this is what God does. God tells Moses to come up on the mountain. And from chapter 20 to chapter 23, God begins to give civil laws, mostly civil laws. There's a few religious laws in there, most of it's civil laws. In Exodus 24, God promises to protect the Israelites with special mercies if they receive and keep the covenant. And in that chapter, we have a very beautiful picture in that we have Moses, Aaron, and some of the elders of Israel come up on the mountain, and they have a feast with God. It talks about seeing the feet of God at the bottom of his throne, and they have a meal to seal this covenant, the renewal of the covenant made with Abraham. The same covenant that they gave to Abraham, that God gave to Abraham, was that if he would remain faithful, he would remain true, that God would bless him and God would take care of him. The same is given here, that God will continue to be with Israel as long as they're faithful to him. That covenant has two parts. Just like any contract has God's part and Israel's part. God's part is that God will protect Israel. God will look after them. God will care for them. If Israel's part, they remain faithful. They remain true to God. And we're going to see throughout the first 5 books of the Old Testament, especially the next 3 books in this book, God's going to repeat that 2 or 3 times. If you'll remain true to me, I'll remain true to you. If you'll serve me, you'll obey me, then I'll bless you and I'll take care of you. If you don't, and the flip side here, if you don't do this for me, then I don't have to do it for you. He may do it, but he doesn't have to do it. And that's what we're going to see really throughout the rest of the Old Testament. And that's why this is so key to understand that this is where that concept begins with Israel. When God gives Israel this renewed covenant that they were going to be his people. All right, here we get into chapter 25. Chapter 25 is very interesting chapters. Chapter 25 through chapter 31 is one of those places in the Bible, and I say this with trepidation, but I found myself, this has been true for myself as well as many people I talk to. This is where people start to struggle with reading the Bible. And what I mean by that is if you start a new year to read the Bible, when you start in Genesis 1, you read those stories, those accounts in Genesis, and they fly by and you just absorb them and they're great accounts. Then you get to Exodus and you read about Exodus, Israel and Egypt. You read about the Red Sea. You read about Sinai. You're just enthralled with all that God has said. And then you get to chapter 25. In chapter 25, you hit a brick wall for most people. Because chapter 25, God begins to talk about the tabernacle. And what I'm saying we hit a brick wall is not because this is not interesting, not important. It's because God gives a lot of technical things here. God says how big this is supposed to be, how wide, how high, and a lot of people lose it. They lose their motivation. But I encourage you to press through when you read through these. Just like, and this is always the hardest part for me, is because if you make it through the end of Exodus, you get right into Leviticus. And Leviticus is one of the hardest books we have to read because, again, we don't do some things it talks about. We don't understand it all. As far as the peculiars about it, we understand what it means and what their point was, but there's some peculiars about how they did certain things we may not understand. It makes it very hard, but I encourage you, push through those books and get to the rest of them, because all those books are beautiful, and some of them are hard, but they're worth it. But I go back to Exodus 25. Exodus 25, verse 1 through 40, God begins to talk about this tabernacle. And he talks about the furnishings of the tabernacle. He talks about the Ark of the Covenant. The ark's going to be there. The altar of incense is going to be in there. The table of showbread is going to be in there, and a golden lampstand. Now, what are these? I want to spend some time giving you some pictures. These are artist rendition and some other mock-ups of what this tabernacle would have looked like. You can see here. Let me get my little pointer here so I can point this out. I'll show you more. Let me go ahead and go this is a basic overview. I'm going to go to the next slide, and there's some more points on this next slide that talks about this. You can see this is how the God lays out the covenant, the tabernacle. Now, it's very important to notice down here at the bottom, the direction. There's a very key thing here that this tabernacle has to point toward the east. This gate has to be on the east side. This is the north side, the south side, and the west side. And what's going to be interesting is when God sends the children of Israel out, there are going to be certain tribes that certain 4 tribes on the south, north side, 4 on the west, 4 on the south, and 4 on the east, if I remember correctly. And this is what God's going to do. God's going to have very peculiar instructions for them. Now let's talk about this. There's a gate. This gate of the tabernacle, excuse me, this gate of the court is 20 cubits long. It's 20 cubits wide in this little hole. The entire front of the tabernacle is 50 cubits. Now remember, a cubit, let's say here, is 1.5 feet. So you're looking at about 75 feet wide. This is not a small complex. This is 75 feet wide and about 150 feet long. There are pillars with this linen curtain that surround the ark or surround the tabernacle. Inside the tabernacle, there is this bronze altar. This is where they would offer all their this is where they would offer the burnt offerings. This thing would have been 7 foot by 7 foot and about 4.5 foot high. If I did my math right there. This laver, it would have had a big golden laver. We're never told the measurements of that laver, but it would have been a big bowl for washing of hands and washing of preparing to go into the tabernacle. You'll see the tabernacle itself is 10 cubits wide and 20 cubits long. And this tabernacle, as you know, is about 1.5. There is, excuse me, 30 cubits long. There's 20 cubits for the holy place and 10 cubits for the most holy place. In the holy place, you have the candlestick. Again, we're not told in the scripture how measurements are here. There is a table of showbread that is laid out here. It has 12 loaves of bread. Then there's the golden offering or the golden altar or the bronze altar. This has been for incense. Then there's a veil that divides these 2 parts from each other. And in the back, you have the Ark of the Covenant. That ark, that box of where they'd have this in the Holy of Holies. Now, let's look at some of these things a little more in detail. This is pictures from a group. I forgot which one I got this from, but there's a group that have, and many people have done this for years, to make a mock-up tabernacle. If you ever get a chance to go see one of these mock-up tabernacles, they're pretty interesting. We have one every time we go to CYC or PTP. They have either a tabernacle or they have a temple set up, and it's very, very interesting to see this temple, see exactly how these things were built and where they were at. This is what the ark. This is what people believe the ark would look like. Again, we're not 100% sure, but this is the best rendition. You can see the poles that were used to cover it. It was lined in gold. It had this 2 cherubim on the top, and in between these cherubim is where the Spirit of God was said to reside. This is a representation of the table of showbread. Again, just like the ark, you'll notice that it has the poles. And remember, the Ark of the Covenant was not supposed to be touched by hands. None of this was supposed to be touched by hands. The way they would carry that is they would carry it by the 2 poles. They'd have 2 poles on each side, and that was a tribe of Levi. That was one of their jobs when they moved this tabernacle. Their job was to carry the tabernacle or to carry certain pieces of the tabernacle. On this table of showbread, we're told they had 12 loaves. These were 12 loaves, representing 12 tribes, and this is what was inside there. From there, we get to the candle place. This candlestick had 7 prongs to it, 7 branches. Had 1 center branch and then 3 on each side. It was supposed to look like an almond branch. It was lighted daily with the best olive oil, and it stood in the holy place. Again, this is a picture from what's believed to be the tabernacle or a drawing of the temple, because you see the gold behind it, but you still see that candlestick, what the idea of that thing would look like. From there, we get to Exodus 26. We looked at the first few elements a minute ago. In chapter 26, you see the great tent, the tent that covered the tabernacle, the altar, the burnt offering. What it basically is, those other things are what's inside the tabernacle or inside the tent. These are the things that are outside the tent. There's a great tent, the altar, burnt offering, the courtyard, the garments of the priest, the elements of tabernacle ministry, and then the importance of the Sabbath. And so God's gonna lay this out for Israel very plainly, very simply. And this is God giving it Moses instruction he's supposed to take to the people. Now let's talk about these next few things. This is what would happen again. This right here would be the altar of burnt offering. This is where they would bring in the cow, like you see here. They bring it in, they would slaughter it, and then they would offer it up on this tabernacle or on this altar. This is another representation. This is a wilderness out in Israel, from my understanding, or I can't remember, it was somewhere in the desert, excuse me, where they did a mock-up of this. And this is the burnt offering, the altar burnt offering. This thing is 7 foot by 7 foot. It's a perfect square. And this is what it'd be. And this is what the tabernacle would have looked like, how it would have been. They had different skins that laid on top of it. The slide earlier talked about the skins. There are 4 skins that were to cover this tabernacle and make this thing very, very dark, very protected. Nothing could get in, nothing could get out. The tabernacle again itself, or the burnt offering, you can see the poles that were used for carrying it. There's these horns. When talked about the horns of the altar that the blood was supposed to be placed upon, that's these things right here. I hope you can see this pretty good. There's a hook, almost like a hook right here. These are the horns of the tabernacle. When certain sacrifices were made, they were told to put blood on the horns. Well, that's what it was. And so this is where they'd offer an animal. They would take an animal, they'd drain the blood of it. Then they would take the animal, they'd split it in half, and they would check that animal out from all sides to make sure it was perfect. And then they'd place it on this altar and they would burn it up. They'd burn the animals up. And this is the altar where all the burning of animals took place at. This is, we talked about the priest's garment. You'll notice that his chest plate is very, very important, very key. In this chest plate, you'll notice there are 12 stones. And in these 12 stones, you'll see there's writing. Now, what this writing is this Hebrew writing. This is Hebrew words. What this is that this is, again, a mock-up of what people think the priest would have wore. When the priest, especially the high priest, would have went in. This would have been the high priest. When he went into the most holy place, and he went into the tabernacle, this is what he wore. This was his garments of service. You can see the robes, you see the ephod, the hat. Then you see this breastplate. And again, we go back to this breastplate, a little zoomed in. And these breastplate has 12 stones on it. Well, these 12 stones represent the 12 tribes of Israel. And on these stones is the name of one of the tribes. And so this was when he went in. He was not just going in for himself. He was going in to represent all the people of God. All right, from there we get to the next point, next item. This is sort of out of order. This is inside the tabernacle, but God tells about later. This is the altar of incense. This is the altar where they would burn incense on there. Certain incense they were supposed to burn here. You can see the little tools that they would put that in those tools, and they would burn it, or burn incense as a sweet-smelling aroma to God. Again, you see right here. These horns, again, you notice that they're red. These are red. These, more so than the other altar, are the ones where the blood was supposed to be taken. The blood from the sacrifice outside was to be brought inside and placed on these horns. And that was part of their offering, their sacrifice to God. This is a zoomed out view of the tabernacle. Again, a minute ago you said a little bit. This is 75 foot by 150 feet of how big this tabernacle is. So this was a pretty big complex, and this is how it would have looked. You would have had, like I say, 4 tribes on each side camped out, and certain tribes slept in certain areas. And God laid this out very plainly for Israel to see and for Israel to know. This again is the layout of this tabernacle. Again, the gate's 20 cubits. All this is in cubit standard, the 5 cubits, and 3 cubits. This is where everything was. Again, you'll see the burnt offering was here. The brazen altar, or the burnt offering, or brazen altar and burnt offerings, was here. The laver was here. The entrance to the tabernacle, the showbread, the gold menorah, or the table, the altar of incense, the veil was here, and then the Ark of the Covenant was in the back, and this was the holy place and the most holy, or Holy of Holies. You'll notice that the holy place was 10 by 20 by 10 cubits high. The Holy of Holies was a perfect square. Cube, if you will. It's 10 cubits wide, 10 cubits long, or 10 cubits wide, 10 cubits long, and 10 cubits high. So it's very peculiar, very important details that God includes there of the measurements. All right, so now we get through that part of Exodus. We get to the next part. This has always been an interesting part to me. because in Exodus chapter 32, we see Israel falling. Israel has just received the word of God. God has just scared them to death from the Mount of Sinai, not even 40 days prior to this. Not even 40 days has passed. Moses has been on the mountain, and we're told that 40 days have passed, and people come to Aaron and say, hey, Aaron, Moses is gone. And they say, we need a God. We need something to worship. Why don't you build us an altar? Build us an image to worship. Now, remember, God just spoke to him and said, don't have an image. Don't worship another God. And what does Aaron do? Aaron takes the gold ear. He tells them all to bring the gold earrings to him. And what does he do? He melts the gold down. He makes a golden calf. And most of us know this story. We've heard it from kids. We grew up in the church. We know the story. They worship that golden calf. And Aaron says, here is your God. Here is the God that delivered you. And Moses is up on the mountain. The people are down and they're partying. They're having a good old time worshiping this golden calf. And Moses is up on the mountain. And Moses hears the racket. Moses thinks there's war. And God says, the people have sinned against me. And here's what I believe is a test for Moses. God says, I'm going to destroy them. I'm going to do away with them, Moses, because they have turned away from me. They've given my word. They've given me up. But Moses says, no, let me go down there. And you know, Moses, he takes the 2 tablets of the law with him, 2 stone tablets, and he gets halfway down the mountain where Joshua is. That's a very interesting fact that we sometimes forget. Joshua is up on the mountain with Moses. He's just not at the top. Joshua is halfway up. Joshua hears the noise, and he says, Moses, we got to get down there. They're fighting. And Moses says, no, it's worse than fighting what's happening down there. And so Moses comes down. He sees what the people are doing, and in anger, he shatters the 2 stone tablets. And after he shatters those 2 stone tablets, he runs into the people and says, what are you doing? And they say, oh, well, Aaron man said, yeah, calf worshiping. Remember, this is the most interesting, one of the most interesting to me. Aaron's response is, oh, well, I just threw the gold in the fire and this calf popped out. I didn't do anything, Moses. Now, wait a minute. This is Aaron, the man who has been speaking for God from Moses. And this is his excuse. What this teaches us, and I'll give a little teaching lesson real quick. This teaches us if we're not careful, anybody can fall. The high priest of Israel, who's going to be the first high priest, makes a sin because he makes this golden calf. And Moses says, no, this isn't going to happen. And so Moses, very interesting, another part of the story we don't read about it in Sunday school typically, is Moses takes that golden calf and he burns it. And then he grinds it up, and then he pours it on the water. And he makes the people of Israel drink the water of that God. And then, now this is another interesting point that's interesting, is that Moses then puts out a call. It says, who is for God? Who will stand up and fight for God amidst this bad times? And there's one tribe that steps forward. It's the tribe of Levi. And Moses says, this is the command of God. Strap on your sword to your side and go through here and kill your neighbor, your fellow man, all those who are worshiping the golden calf. And it says that the tribe of Levi begins to go throughout the camp of Israel, and 3,000 men are killed that day. That's how Levi gets chosen to be the priest of the tribe, because they're the one tribe that will stand with God when no one else would. And so what happens next is that God calls Moses back, and God says, Moses, I'm going to start all over. I'm going to wipe out Israel. I think this is a test of Moses to see what Moses was saying. God says, I'm going to wipe out Israel. We're going to start all over. We're going to do away with them. I'm not going to save them. I'm going to let them be departed. And Moses says, no. Moses says, God, either forgive them or blot my name out with them. And Moses says, God, if you destroy Israel, Egypt's going to laugh at you. Egypt's going to mock you. They're going to ridicule you and say, oh, well, their God delivered them from Egypt, but he couldn't save them in the wilderness. What kind of a God is that? And so God says, Moses, for your statement, I'll save them. And God pardons Israel. And then in chapter 34, we have this renewal of the covenant. The renewal this time, remember the first time God broke all those stone tablets that Moses took down and broke. This time Moses has to draw on the stone tablets. But in the midst of this, chapter 33 and 34, we see a very interesting encounter with Moses. Is that Moses has to go Moses asked to see the face of God. And God said, Moses, you can't see me and live. He said, but here's what I'll do. He said, I'll put you in a cave. And when I walk by, I'll announce my presence. He says, when I walk by, I'll put you in a cave. And I'll put my hand over the cave where you can't see me. Because if you see my face, you're going to die. And when I get to the other side, I'll move my hand away. You can see me leaving. You can see my back, the back. And we see chapter 34, that's exactly what happens for Moses. God looks after him. God grants his wish for him. And then we begin to see this time that when Moses comes to the people, his face is bright and shining. And so God renewed the covenant with Israel. And Israel again makes the statement, you'll be our God and we'll be your people. We will obey your commandments. We'll obey your covenant. Then chapter 35 of Exodus, we see the Sabbath regulations are given. Then from chapter 35 to chapter 40, we have the construction of the tabernacle. We're told about God and how he gave insight, gave the plans to the minds of two of the men of Israel who are great workers, great craftsmen, and they begin to build the altar. And again, this is another interesting story, that interesting account that happens here. This is one of the few times you see what we may call a church work or a religious work where the people says, quit giving money. I've made this point many times in my sermons and in Bible classes. I've never been in a church where the elders have said, hey, listen, guys, quit giving money. You give too much. So what Moses has to do here. The people of Israel, he comes and says, hey, we need gold, we need wood, we got to have all these things to make this. The people of Israel give and give and give until finally Moses says, hey, look, we've got more than enough. Y'all have to stop. I think that's a sign of Israel's repentance. That Israel is trying to go above and beyond what is required to build a tabernacle. And then finally, we see that tabernacle constructed, that tabernacle built. And in the last few verses of Exodus chapter 40, verse 34 to 38, we see God's guidance come upon Israel. Remember, he was leading them by a cloud of fire, or cloud of the pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night leading them. Now, so they can know when to move and when not to move, God says that he's going to send a cloud upon the temple or upon the tabernacle. When God's presence is in the tabernacle, they're to stay where they are. They're not to move. When the cloud lifts, then the people are supposed to pack everything up and begin traveling. And then they're supposed to stop when God's presence comes back. Matter of fact, we're told here that when they finish the tabernacle, God's presence comes down into that tabernacle and fills it so fully that not even Moses could go into that tabernacle or into that tent to see God or to hear God's commands. And this is what happens. The cloud will come down. We'll see this reference throughout the next 3 books. The cloud will come down on the tabernacle for God, the sign of Moses. Okay, Moses, come talk to me. Moses, it's time to get your next commands. Or Moses, it's time to find out what we're going to do next. And when the cloud lifted, they would go. And the people knew when they saw the cloud on the tabernacle that God was there and Moses was there. So it's a very interesting thing. But here we have God telling them that he will be with them, that he will lead them, he will guide them, and he'll protect them. God is keeping up his end of the promise. And the interesting thing about this, and this will be the last point from that, is that part of God's covenant, there was 2 parts. God's part and Israel's part. God's part was, I'll bless you, I'll take care of you, I'll keep you well, I'll do all that you need, as long as you do your part, and that is stay faithful to me. In Exodus 33, we can see God. When Israel sinned and committed that sin with the golden calf, God could have done what he said to Moses and said, I'm done. I'm washing my hands. I'm through with this people. This people has infuriated me. I want nothing to do with them anymore. But we see God as a God of mercy, a God of grace. Sometimes we forget that God is God of grace in the Old Testament as well as the New. We think that in the New Testament, we got the monopoly on forgiveness and mercy and grace and all those words we love to talk about. But God had those in the Old Testament as well. God had grace. He had mercy. Now, there were some stiffer consequences that happened at quicker times. But that should give a warning to us, too, saying that God's not slow. God's not just going to let things go without doing anything. But God's going to step up. God's going to do what needs to be done to take care of his people, if his people remain true to him. And that's the lesson we can learn from the Exodus, is the idea that God will look after his people. God will care for his children if his children obey him, if his children follow him, if his children are really his children, and being the people that he called them to be. Appreciate you joining us here tonight for our study of Exodus. we got through the book of Exodus. Next week, we're going to pick up in Leviticus, and I promise you we're going to get through Leviticus and hopefully get through Numbers, if not Deuteronomy. That's my goal for next week. We'll see you then at 7 o'clock next Tuesday night. Like I said, we got 4 more lessons left in this class, and then we'll be breaking for spring. I appreciate everyone taking the time to be here to join us. I know this has been different for us all, but I appreciate everyone's working to make this as best it can be. Again, appreciate you being here. Remember, next Tuesday night, we'll be back. Until then, I hope that God blesses you and hope that you're having a God-blessed day. We will see you then. Like I say, we're going to end our video for our live stream, guys. We'll see you next Tuesday night. Remember, if you are part of our church here, remember we have our Bible class tomorrow night at 7 on Zoom. And also we have our live service on Sundays at 10 o'clock. If you don't have somewhere to watch, we'd love you to do that as well. But again, we appreciate everyone being here. Appreciate you watching tonight. We hope that you're having a God-blessed week. And we'll see you, God willing, next